95-year-old Hackman and his wife, a 63-year-old classical pianist, their German Shepherd dog, all of them tonight mysteriously dead. Some secrets are buried in vaults. Some are buried in people. Gene Hackman buried his 40 feet beneath the New Mexico desert behind a wall no one was supposed to find. And when investigators finally found it, the story disappeared within 48 hours. Shadowed grounds. Gene Hackman spent the last 40 years of his life building a wall between himself and the world. 2 Academy Awards, one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood history. Dozens of films that defined what American cinema could be. Then in 2004, he walked away. No farewell interview, no final project announced, and quietly shelved. He moved to a sprawling property outside Santa Fe, New Mexico. And that was the last the public heard from him. Most people accepted the story at face value. Tired actor, quiet retirement, nothing to see here. But here is what that story never explained. The property Hackman chose was not a place you pick because you want peace and quiet. It was a fortress. Stone walls reaching 10 feet high surrounded the entire perimeter. Motion sensors at every entrance. Thermal cameras monitoring the grounds 24 hours a day. The gates were reinforced steel set so deep into the treine that you could drive the road directly in front of the estate and never know a mansion was sitting a few hundred yards away. This was not a celebrity security setup. This was infrastructure engineered to keep something in as much as to keep people out. The staff he hired were vetted with a precision that went far beyond standard background checks. Every person who worked on that property was required to sign legal agreements, so airtight that not one of them, not one, leaked a single detail about the estate for over 2 decades. Think about that. In the era of social media, of phone cameras, of people posting everything, the Hackman property produced zero. The silence was total and maintained. Margaret Chen, a land records researcher at the Santa Fe Historical Society, spent 4 months in 2019 trying to trace the property's construction history. She drove out to the county clerk's office in person. She filed formal public records requests. She tracked down retired employees who had processed permits during the years the estate was developed. What she found, or rather what she could not find, shook her. Building permits that should have existed were either redacted to the point of uselessness or simply gone. Whole sections of the public record had been cleared out. She told a colleague she felt like she was chasing a building that officially had never been built. Then she stopped. She stopped returning calls. She never published her work. Nobody knows what she found in those final weeks of her search or who told her the search was over. The Hackman estate was a place where information went to die. Everything changed in early 2025. A handyman named Robert Vigil, who had maintained the property's grounds for nearly a decade, grew alarmed when he realized he had not seen Gene or his wife Betsy in several days. He knew their routine. He knew when the lights came on and when they went off. The pattern had broken, the gates were locked, the phones went unanswered. When Santa Fe County authorities arrived, they had to cut through the locks to get inside. For a property that had run with the discipline of a small military installation, the sudden silence was deafening. Officers entered the main house expecting a routine welfare check. What they found was not routine. Gene and Betsy had both passed away from natural causes. But the house did not look like a home where 2 elderly people had quietly died. Furniture had been dragged across the hardwood floors, leaving deep gouges in the wood. Books had been pulled from the shelves of the library and left in disordered stacks across the floor, spines up, as if someone had been searching through them fast and without care. The safe in the master bedroom was wide open, completely empty. Whatever Hackman had kept behind that steel door for decades was gone. It looked like someone had moved through the house before the authorities arrived. They had not taken their time doing it, and they had not left anything behind that might tell you who they were or what they had come for. Then the forensic team moved into the library. The passage below. While scanning for fingerprints along the back wall, a forensic technician noticed something that should not have been there. A section of the stonework did not match. The surrounding wall was uniform. carefully laid, but there was a seam thin enough that you would miss it in normal light. She applied pressure to a section of the molding beside it. The wall slid back without a sound, no creak, no resistance. It moved like it had been used recently. Behind it was not a closet, not a utility room. It was a passage, a stone-framed opening leading to a set of steps that descended into a darkness. The house lights could not touch. The air that came up from below was cold, carrying the smell of wet stone and old metal. The investigators stood at the top of those stairs and understood something immediately. The house above was not the point. It was a cover. Whatever mattered was waiting below. Before we go down those stairs, if you are watching this, you already know the mainstream press buried this story within 48 hours of the discovery. No follow-up, no footage, nothing. The people who find out what actually happened are the ones who do not wait for permission. Subscribe now and hit the bell, because what comes next is exactly the kind of story that gets pulled before it finishes loading. They descended for what felt like 40 feet before the stairs ended in a large underground chamber. The temperature dropped to 45 degrees. The air was thick and still. Flashlight beams swept across the room and landed on rows of wooden crates. Some had rotted through, spilling. Their contents across the stone floor, stacks of paper, metallic objects with no obvious function. Photographs that appeared to date back to the 1930s. Dust over everything. This was not a wine cellar. This was not a prop room from a film career. This was an archive. One agent opened a leather-bound file and found pages dense with coded dates and names. Many of the names belonged to individuals who had vanished from official records decades ago. There were hand-drawn maps of underground installations spread across the American Southwest. Some of the sites marked on those maps are still classified to this day. The picture forming in that underground room was not of a retired actor's hobby. It was the working library of someone who had been assigned to preserve a history the government had decided the public should never see. But it was the floor that stopped everyone cold. Carved directly into the stone, not painted, not etched superficially, but cut deep into the bedrock, were intricate circular patterns covering most of the chamber floor. They were precise mathematical. Forensic technicians who documented them later confirmed that the designs corresponded to specific orbital paths of satellites and celestial bodies. The level of accuracy was not decorative. Whoever carved them had advanced knowledge of astronomy, knowledge that based on the apparent age of the carvings, they should not have had. The markings were oriented and arranged so that their full meaning could only be read by someone standing at the exact center of the room. It was it. An underground observatory built in a place where no stars could ever be seen. Designed to be understood by someone who already knew what they were looking at. Buried legacy. As the team moved deeper into the chamber, the walls themselves began to tell a story. Near the top of the stairwell, the stonework was clean. Modern concrete, likely updated when Hackman purchased the property in the mid-1980s. But the further down they went, the older the construction became. Smooth, poured concrete gave way to hand-carved stone. The pick marks were still visible in the rock face. Deliberate angled strokes left by someone working by hand a long time ago. This is the detail that changes everything. Hackman did not build this tunnel. He moved into a property that already held a secret, and he spent the next 30 years making sure it stayed that way. The underground infrastructure of northern New Mexico is not a fringe subject. It is documented federal history. During the Cold War, The United States government constructed hundreds of bunkers, hardened communication relays, and tunnel networks throughout the state. Los Alamos National Laboratory, where the atomic bomb was developed, sits a short drive from the Hackman estate. Declassified records confirm subterranean facilities built beneath messes and into the sides of mountains throughout the region, designed to protect critical government operations from a nuclear strike. Many of these projects were listed as decommissioned in the 1970s and 80s. Whether they were actually abandoned is an entirely different question. Dr. Frank Salazar, a retired geologist who had spent 30 years surveying land formations across northern New Mexico, lived 2 houses down from the Hackman estate for over 20 years. He sat in his kitchen one evening in the late 90s and told a neighbor something that would take years to mean anything. He said the ground had a pulse. His exact words were that he could feel a low-frequency vibration through the floor of his own home late at night when everything else was quiet. Not the rumble of a truck on the highway, not a plane, something deeper, rhythmic, industrial. He said it felt like heavy machinery running on a schedule. He reported it to Santa Fe County 3 separate times. Each time the complaint was logged, no inspector ever came. No follow-up was ever made. Salazar eventually stopped filing reports. He told his neighbor, shortly before he passed away in 2021, that he had always believed something was running under that hill on a schedule nobody was supposed to know about. He said he could not explain the rhythm. He said he was not sure he wanted to. The estate's official utility record showed nothing unusual. No power consumption anomaly, no unexplained draw on the grid, which means whatever Salazar was hearing, whatever machinery was running on that schedule deep beneath a property whose power bills read as normal, was running on something that never touched the public grid. And nobody has ever explained what that was or whether it is still running now. Hidden path. The deeper the investigation team pushed into the chamber, the more the room gave up. Near the back wall, partially obscured by a collapsed wooden shelf, they found a secondary communication system, not a modern phone line, not fiber optic cable. It was a closed-circuit hardwire system. Old-school technology, the kind built in the 1950s to survive an electromagnetic pulse. The line ran directly through the cavity of the stone wall, feeding upward through the structure of the mansion and terminating, as investigators later confirmed, inside a panel hidden behind a false baseboard in the library above. Someone sitting in that library could communicate with someone in the tunnel below on a channel that left no trace on any telecom network. There was no record of it anywhere, no installation permit, no service history. It was completely off any grid that has ever been made public. James Kowalski, a structural engineer contracted by the FBI to assess the chamber's construction, stood in the center of that room for a long time before he said anything. He had spent 20 years consulting on federal building projects and had evaluated dozens of Cold War-era bunker sites across the country. He ran his hand along one of the steel support beams and said quietly that the riveting pattern matched specifications he had only ever seen in documents classified above his clearance level. He said it plainly, standing there in 45 degrees air with a flashlight in his hand. A wine cellar does not need to withstand a bunker-busting bomb. The only reason you build a room to those tolerances is if what is inside it is critical to national security. Then he pointed to the communication panel and asked who had been maintaining it. That was the question, because here is the detail that makes everything else impossible to dismiss. The system was still operational, not a relic, not a leftover from a forgotten era. Operational. The power was being supplied by a bank of deep-cycle batteries maintained by a trickle charger concealed inside the house's mechanical room, wired so carefully into the existing electrical system that it appeared on no schematic. The batteries had been cycled and replaced based on manufacturing dates stamped on the units at least twice in the last 15 years. Someone had been keeping that line alive, and someone presumably had been on the other end of it. On a stone pedestal near the center of the room sat a small metal cylinder the size of a standard beverage can cast from a dense dark metal. No visible seams, no screws, no external features of any kind. It appeared to have been made as a single solid piece. When a forensic analyst attempted to X-ray it, the scan returned no usable image. The metal was too dense to penetrate with the equipment on hand. It did not match the construction era of the tunnel. It did not match Cold War hardware. It did not match anything in any catalogue the team had access to. Every specialist brought in to assess it left the room with more questions than they arrived with. The ghost line was active. Someone had been using it. That is the fact nobody in that room could account for. Neighbors in the surrounding area had memories that now carried weight they had never noticed before. Unmarked trucks had arrived at the estate in the middle of the night once or twice a year for at least a decade. No logos, no markings of any kind. The drivers never got out. Each truck would pull into the estate's garage. The door would close, and hours would pass before it opened again. The neighbors had assumed it was private delivery of artwork or furniture. Eccentric behavior from a reclusive actor. Nobody had thought to write it down. Now it appears those trucks were part of a systematic operation. Material moving in and out of the tunnel under cover of darkness on a schedule that only made sense if someone was managing inventory. Hackman was not simply a homeowner, he was a sentinel. He had spent the final third of his life guarding a door that the rest of the world had forgotten existed, and he never told a single person what was behind it. Gated truth. At the far end of the chamber stood the discovery that stopped the investigation cold. An iron door 7 feet tall, 5 feet wide, no handles on the exterior face, no keyholes, no hinges visible from the chamber side. It was a flat slab of solid iron fused directly into the rock wall at every seam, welded shut with thick, uneven passes of a torch. It did not belong. The welds were rushed, messy. Every other element of the tunnel had been executed with the precision of a professional government project. But those welds looked like someone working fast under pressure without time to do it cleanly. Someone had needed whatever was on the other side sealed permanently, and they had needed it done quickly. The FBI brought in a thermal imaging team. The sensors returned a reading nobody in the room was prepared for. 3 degrees warmer behind the iron than in the chamber. In a sealed underground room with no identified heat source, no active ventilation, and no electrical connection anyone could trace. The air on the far side of that door was 3 degrees warmer than the air on this side. 3 degrees sounds like nothing. In a room that had been sealed for years in a desert where the underground temperature stabilizes completely, 3 degrees is the difference between dead and alive. There was no sound, no vibration, no visible light at the seams, just a pocket of warmth sitting behind 2 inches of solid steel in a room that had supposedly been sealed for years. Agents were ordered to stand down. A specialized team was being dispatched from Washington. That is where the public record ends. Since the discovery of the iron door, the FBI has released almost nothing. No press conferences, no photographs of the chamber, the crates, the communication panel, or the metal cylinder. No acknowledgement that an iron door was found, or that thermal anomalies were detected behind it. Within 48 hours, the investigation was transferred out of the Santa Fe field office and placed under a tier of federal oversight that does not issue public updates. Local officials who had been briefed during the first day stopped returning calls. Journalists who contacted the Santa Fe field office were routed to a federal press liaison who confirmed only that the investigation into the deaths of Gan and Betsy Hackman had concluded. Cause of death natural. Nothing suspicious about the estate. Case closed. But you do not deploy federal thermal imaging teams for natural causes. You do not transfer a death investigation to federal jurisdiction in 48 hours unless someone above the local level has decided this is no longer a local matter. You do not seize a private estate under a national security eminent domain filing because 2 elderly people died of natural causes. The property has been seized. The eminent domain filing cites national security concerns without elaboration. The stone walls have been reinforced. Security is now handled by private contractors who wear no uniforms and carry no visible identification. If you attempt to approach the gates today, you are turned away before you reach the entrance. The neighbors who spent years noticing the vibrations and the unmarked trucks have gone quiet. Everything has been pulled back beneath the surface. The story was sealed almost as fast as the door. Final guardian, the most credible framework for what Hackman was doing on that property. The one that accounts for the Cold War-era construction, the military RA reinforcements, and the hardwire communication line is that the tunnel was part of a backup government network. These sites existed throughout the country, built in the 1950s and 60s to survive a nuclear exchange and keep critical government infrastructure operational in the aftermath. Some were placed beneath mountains, some beneath federal facilities, and some reportedly beneath the private properties of citizens selected for their reliability, their public invisibility, and their ability to maintain silence across decades. A two-time Academy Award winner living in voluntary seclusion in the New Mexico desert is exactly the profile you build the list around. Famous enough that people leave him alone, disciplined enough to follow a protocol for 30 years without breaking. But the Cold War framework only carries so far before it runs into the floor of that chamber. The star maps carved into the stone do not fit a communication relay. The level of astronomical precision in those carvings, orbital paths confirmed by forensic technicians to correspond to satellite and celestial body trajectories, required knowledge that was not publicly accessible during the earliest phases of the tunnel's construction. The seamless metal cylinder on its stone pedestal is not a component of any communication system from any era that any specialist has been able to identify. Some researchers who have studied the available documentation believe the government-built infrastructure was constructed on top of something that was already there, something older, a geological formation or a pre-existing structure studied in classified conditions for over a century before Hackman arrived. In this reading, he was not maintaining a radio relay, he was watching a gate, and whatever he had seen in that tunnel during his final years was enough to make him seal the door himself and let the silence take over. Now that he is gone, the last line of defense for whatever lies below that estate has disappeared with him. He was the one who kept the batteries charged. He was the one who maintained the silence, and that required more than simply avoiding the press. It required a total psychological commitment to a version of reality he could share with no one. Not his staff, not the industry colleagues who quietly wondered why he walked away from Hollywood in 2004 without a word, not his fans. He lived for decades in a kind of double existence. The world saw a famous actor and quiet retirement. What was actually happening was something else entirely. Think about the life he chose instead. A man who could have spent his final decades accepting every tribute a career like his had genuinely earned. Who could have written a memoir, given masterclasses, attended retrospectives where audiences rose to their feet. Instead, he built a fortress and lived inside it. He checked sensors. He maintained a communication line that connected to a contact whose identity has never been confirmed. He received unmarked trucks in the middle of the night and followed protocols that could never be explained to anyone around him. He stated his post through failing health in an estate that grew quieter every year until the silence became permanent. That is not retirement, that is duty. The artifacts from the wooden crates are being moved to a secure facility, most likely a subterranean level at Sandia National Laboratories or Los Alamos, both of which have the kind of controlled storage environments appropriate for materials of unknown provenance and unknown risk. The process is being conducted with extreme care, not because the objects are fragile, but because of how they were arranged within the chamber. The geometry of that arrangement may not be incidental. Investigators have been instructed to document the precise position of every object before anything is touched. There is a working theory among the team that the configuration inside the chamber is not storage. That the positions of the crates, the pedestal, the communication terminal, and the floor carvings form a system, and that disturbing the system without understanding it first carries consequences nobody has been willing to put in writing. The ground beneath Santa Fe still holds answers that no press release is going to provide. Hackman played his part for 40 years, and he played it without ever breaking. He used his celebrity as a kind of invisibility. Nobody looks too hard at a famous person who just wants to be left alone. He took everything with him to the end, leaving behind a story that is more compelling, more layered, and more unsettling than anything he ever filmed. The iron door remains sealed. The government team from Washington has not announced what they found or whether they have opened it at all. The specialists working the site have been placed under non-disclosure agreements that extend beyond the standard federal contractor terms. Sources familiar with the operation have described the atmosphere around the estate as unlike anything they have encountered on a domestic assignment. Nobody is talking. Nobody is being allowed to talk. The silence over the estate is total, and somewhere in that darkness, 40 feet below the desert floor, something is still warm. What do you think is really behind that door? Drop your answer in the comments. We read everyone. And if you want the stories that get buried before they finish breaking, subscribe and hit the bell.